You can't go in there. A little girl stopped a millionaire at the elevator, seconds before everything went terribly wrong. The lobby of the business tower gleamed with polished stone and glass, a place designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Executives hurried past with phones pressed to their ears, heels clicked sharply against the floor, and security cameras followed every movement without emotion. Ethan Blake moved through the space with practiced confidence, his posture straight, his tailored suit immaculate, his blue eyes focused on the digital clock above the elevator bank. He was late, and lateness was not something he tolerated, especially today. The meeting waiting for him upstairs was critical, the kind that reshaped companies and careers. Years of work had narrowed into a single hour, and every second mattered. His security team flanked him discreetly, clearing the path without drawing attention. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its doors sliding open to reveal a mirrored interior that reflected Ethan's calm, controlled expression. He stepped inside, already reviewing numbers in his head, when a sharp, desperate voice sliced through the hum of the lobby. You can't go in there. The words were so unexpected that Ethan froze. The elevator doors hesitated, then began to slide shut again. He turned, irritation flashing across his face, ready to dismiss the interruption, and that was when he saw her. A little girl stood a few feet away, no older than 7. She was blonde, her pale hair pulled back neatly, her blue eyes wide and shining with urgency. She wore a simple white dress that looked carefully kept but clearly old, and in her hand she clutched a red briefcase almost as big as her torso. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. Ethan frowned. This is a restricted area, he said curtly. Where's your mother? She took a hesitant step forward, shaking her head. Please, she said again, her voice trembling but determined. You really can't go up there. It's not safe. Something in her tone made Ethan pause despite himself. It wasn't childish fear or a desire for attention. It was urgency layered with certainty, as if she were fighting against time itself. One of the guards shifted, ready to escort her away, but Ethan raised a hand without looking back. His eyes stayed on the girl's face. What are you talking about? He asked. She opened her mouth to answer, then glanced nervously at the elevator, as if afraid it might move without her permission. The cables, she whispered. They said the cables wouldn't hold. The doors began to close again. Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket, the screen lighting up with an incoming call from his partner upstairs. Instinctively, he glanced down. In that split second of distraction, the girl's face twisted with panic. No, she cried. Please. The doors slid shut. Ethan stepped back automatically, answering the call without thinking, his attention divided for just long enough to save his life. The elevator began to rise without him, carrying his security team and several other employees upward. The girl stood frozen in front of him, her breathing shallow, eyes locked on the closed doors. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the building shook. A deep, sickening sound echoed through the shaft, followed by screams and alarms as the elevator cables snapped. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and chaos erupted in the lobby. People shouted, security rushed forward, and emergency lights flickered on. Ethan stood motionless, his heart pounding violently in his chest, staring at the elevator indicator as it dropped rapidly. He slowly turned back toward the girl. She was gone. All that remained was the echo of her warning and the horrifying realization that if he had ignored her completely, he would have been inside that elevator. Alive had never felt so fragile. The lobby descended into chaos within seconds, the polished calm of the building shattering as if it had never existed. Alarms blared overhead, red lights pulsed along the walls, and people rushed in every direction, some frozen in shock, others shouting names that went unanswered. Ethan stood at the center of it all, unable to move, his gaze locked on the elevator shaft as emergency responders poured through the doors. His security chief grabbed his arm, pulling him back from the edge just as the first reports crackled through the radios. The elevator had fallen several floors before the emergency brakes engaged. There were injuries. Possibly worse. Ethan barely heard the details. His ears rang, his heart thudded painfully, and one thought repeated itself over and over with merciless clarity. If not for the girl. He scanned the crowd desperately, pushing past stunned employees and shaken executives, searching for a flash of white fabric or the unmistakable red of the small briefcase. She was nowhere. It was as if she had vanished the moment her warning was fulfilled, leaving behind only the echo of her voice and the weight of what she had prevented. "Find her," Ethan said sharply, turning to his head of security. "The child. Blonde. White dress. Red bag. She was right here." The man nodded and immediately began issuing orders, but Ethan could already see the doubt in his eyes. In a building this large, in a moment this chaotic, finding a single child was like searching for a whisper in a storm. Paramedics rushed past carrying stretchers. The reality of what had happened finally crashed down on Ethan with full force. His security team, the men who had been with him for years, had been inside that elevator. The guilt hit him hard and sudden, cutting through the shock. He should have been with them. He should have taken their place. As the lobby was evacuated and cordoned off, Ethan was ushered into a private conference room on the ground floor. The space was quiet, sealed off from the noise, but his hands still trembled as he poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from partners, board members, and media contacts, but he ignored them all. He couldn't stop seeing the girl's face. Her eyes hadn't held fear when she warned him. They had held certainty, as if she already knew what was about to happen and was racing against an outcome she couldn't fully control. The memory sent a chill through him that no amount of rational explanation could erase. Investigators arrived quickly, their questions precise and unrelenting. Ethan answered everything honestly, describing the girl in detail, repeating her exact words. Several of them exchanged looks when he mentioned the cables. "Has anyone mentioned maintenance issues recently?" one officer asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "Not officially." The implication lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. When the immediate questioning ended, Ethan stood and paced the room, the polished table and leather chairs suddenly feeling irrelevant. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed the girl found. Not for publicity. Not for statements. For himself. Hours later, as the building slowly reopened and the worst of the panic subsided, Ethan returned to the lobby under heavy security. The floor was littered with caution tape and equipment, the earlier luxury replaced by harsh fluorescent light. He walked slowly, retracing his steps, replaying the moment again and again in his mind. Near a service corridor, partially hidden behind a column, he noticed something small and red on the floor. He stopped. It was a briefcase. The same one she had been holding. Ethan picked it up carefully, his chest tightening as he realized the truth. She hadn't stayed to see what happened. She hadn't waited for thanks. She had delivered the warning and disappeared back into the shadows of the building, just another invisible presence most people never noticed. But Ethan noticed. And as he stood there holding the red briefcase, surrounded by the aftermath of disaster, he made a silent promise to himself. He would find her. No matter what it took. The red briefcase sat on the table in front of Ethan like a quiet accusation. He had brought it with him into a temporary command room set up by investigators, placing it carefully between stacks of reports and security footage, as if it were something fragile and alive. It was scuffed at the corners, clearly old, the handle worn smooth by small hands. Whatever it had carried, it had been important enough for a child to clutch in fear. Ethan watched as security technicians reviewed camera feeds from the lobby. Angles shifted, time stamps rolled backward and forward, and faces blurred together in the crowd. Then she appeared. The girl in the white dress moved through the frame quickly, her head lowered, her steps light. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She moved with purpose, slipping past adults who never looked down long enough to see her. "Pause there," Ethan said sharply. The image froze. Her face was visible now, tense but focused, her red briefcase held tight against her chest. "Track her path," he ordered. The technicians complied, pulling feeds from adjacent corridors, service elevators, and maintenance hallways. What unfolded over the next hour was both impressive and deeply unsettling. The girl never hesitated. She took routes employees rarely used, ducked into stairwells, slipped through doors that required keycards by following others closely. She knew the building in a way only someone who spent a great deal of time unnoticed could. "She knows this place," one of the investigators murmured. Ethan nodded grimly. "Better than we do." The footage eventually showed her exiting through a side service door near the underground parking area. After that, she vanished from the cameras entirely. "She lives here," Ethan said quietly. It wasn't a question. Further investigation confirmed it. The building employed dozens of night cleaners and maintenance workers, many of whom brought their children with them during long shifts because they couldn't afford childcare. Most of the children stayed hidden, instructed to be quiet, to stay out of sight, to not draw attention. The girl in the white dress was one of them. Her name surfaced in the records hours later. Emily Carter. Age 7. Daughter of Maria Carter, a contracted cleaner assigned to the upper floors. Ethan closed his eyes briefly when he heard the name, a strange mixture of relief and anger flooding through him. Relief that she existed, that she wasn't a figment of adrenaline and shock. Anger that she had been so close, so visible, and yet completely invisible at the same time. He requested to speak to Maria immediately. They found her in a small break room near the maintenance wing, sitting alone with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked exhausted, her uniform wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. When Ethan entered, she stood abruptly, fear flashing across her face. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quickly. "Emily," she didn't understand. "She saved my life," Ethan interrupted gently. Maria froze, staring at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. "She told me not to get in the elevator," he continued. She knew something was wrong. Maria's composure broke instantly. She sank back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. "I told her to stay quiet," she whispered through tears. "I told her not to talk to anyone. She hears things, she notices everything. I was afraid." Ethan felt a heavy knot form in his chest. "Where is she now?" Maria looked up, panic flooding her expression. "I don't know. She ran. She does that when she thinks she's in trouble." The realization hit him hard. Emily hadn't disappeared out of fear of the accident. She had disappeared because she thought she had done something wrong. "I want to find her," Ethan said firmly. "And I want to make sure she's safe." Maria hesitated, uncertainty and mistrust battling across her face. Years of being ignored, overlooked, and dismissed had taught her caution. "You don't have to be afraid," Ethan added quietly. "I won't let anything happen to her. Or to you." It was the first time someone like him had said those words to someone like her and meant them. As security teams spread out through the building and surrounding streets, Ethan remained with Maria, listening as she spoke about Emily. About how she loved books, how she carried her red briefcase everywhere because it held her schoolwork, how she hated loud noises but watched people closely, always trying to understand what they weren't saying. With every detail, Ethan felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. Emily hadn't just shouted a warning. She had stepped into danger because no one else would listen. And now, finding her wasn't just important. It was necessary. The search stretched deep into the evening, spilling beyond the glass walls of the office tower and into the surrounding streets. Security teams combed parking garages, stairwells, storage rooms, and service corridors while Ethan stayed close to Maria, unwilling to leave her alone with her fear. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last. The building that had once symbolized control and success now felt like a maze full of blind spots he had never cared to see before. Maria kept wringing her hands, her eyes darting to every doorway as if Emily might suddenly appear there. "She hides when she's scared," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "She thinks adults get angry when she speaks up. I tried to teach her to stay invisible. I thought it would keep her safe." Ethan felt those words land hard. Invisible. The truth of it was undeniable. If Emily hadn't shouted, if she hadn't broken the rule of being unseen, he would be dead. The irony was cruel and absolute. They found Emily nearly 2 hours later. She was curled up in a narrow maintenance corridor beneath a metal staircase that led to the lower levels, sitting on the cold floor with her knees pulled tightly to her chest. The white dress was smudged with dust, and her red briefcase rested beside her like a shield. She didn't cry or call out when the flashlight beam landed on her. She simply looked up, her blue eyes wary but steady, already prepared for consequences. Maria rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling Emily into her arms, sobbing with relief. Emily stiffened at first, then relaxed slightly, still clutching the handle of the briefcase. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I didn't want to get in trouble." Ethan knelt a few steps away, deliberately keeping his distance, aware that his presence alone could feel overwhelming. "You're not in trouble," he said gently. "You did something very brave." Emily glanced at him briefly, then looked away again. "I wasn't supposed to talk," she said. "But they said the cables were bad. I heard them yesterday." Maria froze. "Who said that?" "The men," Emily replied. "The ones in suits. They were arguing. One of them said the elevator wouldn't make it past the top floors." The word sent a chill through the small group gathered in the corridor. Ethan felt anger flare in his chest, sharp and focused. This wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. "You did exactly the right thing," Ethan said firmly. "You saved lives." Emily looked at him again, this time with confusion rather than fear. "I did." "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Mine included." For a long moment, she stared at him as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then her shoulders slumped slightly, the tension easing just a bit. They moved to a quieter room nearby, where Emily was given water and a blanket. She held the red briefcase tightly on her lap, refusing to let go. Ethan noticed the way she positioned herself close to her mother but kept her eyes on him, studying his expressions with the same careful attention she had used in the lobby. "What's in the bag?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Emily hesitated, then opened it just enough to show the contents. Inside were notebooks filled with neat handwriting, a worn library book, and a small pill organizer. "It's Mama's medicine," she said. "I carry it so she doesn't forget." The quiet responsibility in her voice struck him deeply. This child wasn't just observant. She was a protector. Later, after Maria and Emily had been escorted to a safe area, Ethan stood alone in the corridor, staring at the scuffed floor where they had been found. He felt a shift inside him, something irreversible. The elevator sabotage would be investigated, the guilty punished, the building repaired. But none of that addressed the deeper truth. The danger hadn't only been in the cables. It had been in the silence that nearly swallowed a child who knew the truth and was taught not to speak. And Ethan knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not let that happen again. The following days unfolded under a heavy cloud of tension, but beneath it ran a steady current of determination. Emily and Maria were moved to a secure temporary apartment arranged quietly by Ethan, far from the building and from the attention of the press. The space was modest but clean, filled with light, and for the first time in a long while, Maria slept without waking at every sound. Emily, however, remained alert, her instincts refusing to stand down so easily. Ethan visited often, always announcing himself first, always keeping his movements slow and predictable. He understood now that trust could not be demanded or rushed, especially from a child who had learned that adults listened only when it was convenient. At first, Emily spoke little when he was around, answering questions politely but briefly, her red briefcase never leaving her side. She watched him the way she watched everything else, carefully, measuring not his words but his consistency. The investigation progressed quickly. Emily's testimony, given with a quiet clarity that unsettled seasoned investigators, filled in crucial gaps. She described voices, arguments, fragments of conversations she had overheard while sitting on stairwells or behind cleaning carts. She didn't dramatize anything. She simply told the truth as she had heard it. That truth was enough to confirm sabotage beyond doubt. Maria struggled with guilt, her voice breaking one evening as she spoke to Ethan in the small kitchen. "I told her to stay quiet," she said. "I thought silence would protect her. I was wrong." Ethan shook his head. "You were trying to keep her safe in a world that doesn't make room for people like you," he replied. "The fault isn't yours." Emily overheard them from the doorway. She stepped forward hesitantly. "Mama did the best she could," she said softly. "She always does." Ethan crouched down, meeting Emily at eye level. "And so did you," he said. "You were brave when it mattered most." Something shifted then. Emily didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. She studied his face for a long moment before nodding once, as if accepting a fact she had been reluctant to believe. As news of the incident spread, the narrative began to take shape in the media, but Ethan worked quietly behind the scenes to keep Emily's name out of it. He refused interviews, redirected attention, and made it clear that no child would be turned into a spectacle. This decision cost him political leverage and goodwill in certain circles, but for the first time, those losses felt irrelevant. One afternoon, Ethan brought Emily a new notebook. The cover was plain blue, unmarked. "You don't have to write in it," he said. "But if you ever want to, it's yours." Emily ran her fingers over the cover thoughtfully. "Is it safe?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Nothing in it has to be quiet unless you want it to be." She took the notebook and placed it carefully inside her red briefcase, her grip tightening just slightly. That evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Emily followed him to the door. "Are you going to stop coming?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "I'll keep showing up." She considered this, then gave a small nod. "Okay." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't gratitude. But it was the beginning of something real. As Ethan stepped back into the night, he understood that saving his life had not been the end of Emily's role in this story. It was only the moment that forced him to see the consequences of a world where children were taught to be invisible. And this time, he intended to change that world, starting with her. The truth surfaced piece by piece, not in a single dramatic revelation but through careful, methodical work that left no room for denial. Investigators traced the altered maintenance logs back months, uncovering forged signatures and falsified inspections that had been quietly approved by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The elevator failure had been planned to look like negligence, a tragic accident that would vanish into paperwork and insurance settlements. Emily's words transformed it into something else entirely, a crime with intent and a timeline. Ethan sat through long briefings, listening more than he spoke, his expression calm but his mind relentless. Each new detail hardened his resolve. The men Emily had overheard were identified, their movements tracked, their communications decrypted. One of them had worked indirectly for Ethan's company, a contractor who had access and motive, someone who understood the rhythms of the building and the blind spots in security. The realization that the threat had come from within made Ethan's stomach twist with a cold, steady anger. Emily and Maria were brought in to give formal statements, but Ethan insisted it be done gently, with specialists present who understood how to speak to children without pressing or intimidating. Emily sat straight in her chair, hands folded on her red briefcase, answering questions with careful precision. She didn't embellish or guess. When she didn't know something, she said so plainly. The investigators exchanged glances more than once, impressed by her clarity and unsettled by how much she had noticed without anyone noticing her. Afterward, Emily was quiet for the rest of the day. She stayed close to Maria, her energy subdued, the weight of speaking out finally catching up to her. Ethan noticed and kept his distance, understanding that courage had its limits and that even the bravest child needed rest from being strong. That evening, he arranged for a meeting with Maria alone. They sat across from each other in the small living room of the temporary apartment, the air heavy with things neither of them had said yet. "They told me I should be grateful," Maria said quietly, staring at her hands. "That things turned out the way they did. But all I can think about is how close I came to losing her." Ethan nodded. "Gratitude doesn't erase fear," he said. "And it doesn't erase responsibility." She looked up at him then, her eyes tired but steady. "What happens to us now?" she asked. "When this is over?" The question lingered. Ethan had asked himself the same thing. "You won't be forgotten," he said firmly. "Not this time. I'll make sure you're protected, both of you. And when this case ends, you'll have choices." Maria swallowed hard. "I don't want charity." "I'm not offering charity," Ethan replied. "I'm offering accountability." The next day, arrests were made. The news broke quietly at first, then spread rapidly once official statements were released. Sabotage. Conspiracy. Attempted murder. The words carried weight, and for the first time, the narrative shifted away from a faceless tragedy and toward the truth. Ethan declined interviews, releasing only a brief statement condemning the actions and praising the courage of those who spoke up. He did not mention Emily by name. Emily watched the news from the couch, her knees tucked under her chin. "They're angry," she observed. "Yes," Ethan said, sitting nearby. "Because they were caught." She nodded, then looked at him with a seriousness that felt older than her years. "Will it be quiet now?" He considered the question carefully. "It will be quieter," he said. "But what matters is that people know they can speak." She seemed to think about that, then reached into her red briefcase and pulled out the blue notebook he had given her. She opened it and wrote something slowly, deliberately. "What are you writing?" he asked gently. "Things I don't want to forget," she replied. "So they don't disappear." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest at her words. He understood then that the elevator incident had not only exposed corruption and danger, but also a deeper flaw in the world he had helped build. A system where voices like Emily's were overlooked until it was almost too late. As night settled and the apartment grew quiet, Ethan stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. For years, he had believed that success was measured in growth, efficiency, and control. Now, standing in the stillness, he knew that something else mattered more. Making sure that no child ever had to shout to be heard again. The public phase of the case unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if the world itself needed time to process what had nearly happened. Court dates were set, evidence presented, names released with careful precision. Ethan attended the first hearing quietly, sitting far from cameras, his attention fixed not on the accused but on the small figure beside him. Emily sat straight in her chair, her feet not quite touching the floor, her hands folded over her red briefcase as if it were an anchor. She didn't look afraid, but she didn't look untouched either. This was not a place meant for children, yet here she was, because truth had demanded her presence. When it was over, they stepped outside into the open air, and Emily inhaled deeply, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. They looked smaller in there, she said softly. Ethan understood what she meant. Power always shrank under light. That's what happens when lies run out of places to hide, he replied. Life began to settle into a new shape after that. Maria was offered a permanent position with stable hours and proper benefits, not as a favor, but as a correction. Emily started attending a nearby school, one chosen carefully, quietly, where she could learn without being watched or whispered about. On her first day, she clutched her red briefcase with the same seriousness she had shown in the lobby weeks before, then paused at the gate and turned back. "You'll still come, right?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "Every day I can." She nodded, reassured, and walked inside without looking back. Ethan stood there longer than necessary, watching until she disappeared into the building, feeling a strange mix of pride and protectiveness settle into his chest. In the evenings, Emily talked more. Not about the elevator or the men or the shouting, but about ordinary things that had once felt out of reach. A classmate who shared her pencils. A teacher who smelled like soap and lemons. A library with a window seat she liked because it let her see people without being seen. Ethan listened as if these details were the most important data he had ever been given, because in a way, they were. One night, as they sat together at the small kitchen table, Emily suddenly asked, "Why did no one listen before?" The question was quiet, but it carried weight. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He wanted to be honest without burdening her with bitterness. "Because people get used to not looking down," he said finally. "They forget that important things don't always come from important places." She considered this, then frowned slightly. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Silence settled between them, comfortable now, no longer tense. Emily opened her blue notebook and showed him a page filled with careful handwriting and small drawings of elevators, doors, and people with speech bubbles. "I'm writing about things that almost happened," she explained. "So I remember why it matters." Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. "You don't have to carry that alone," he said gently. She looked up at him, searching his face. "You won't forget, will you?" "No," he said. "I promise." The trial continued, and with it came consequences. Contracts were reviewed. Safety protocols rewritten. Policies changed not in theory, but in practice. Ethan insisted on it personally, rejecting shortcuts and quiet settlements. Some partners pushed back. Others walked away. He let them go. One evening, as he watched Emily asleep on the couch, her red briefcase resting beside her like a loyal guard, Ethan understood the full weight of what had changed. He had survived the elevator. But that was not the miracle. The miracle was that a child who had been taught to stay silent had spoken anyway, and in doing so, had forced a man like him to finally listen. And this time, he knew, he would not stop. A year passed quietly, without headlines or dramatic milestones, and that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. The world remembered the elevator incident as a narrowly avoided tragedy, a case study in corporate sabotage and accountability, but for him, time had reshaped it into something far more personal. The building had been repaired, redesigned, and reopened with new safety standards so strict they became a model for the entire industry. Yet Ethan rarely visited it anymore. His life had shifted elsewhere. Emily grew into the space she had once only passed through silently. She walked to school with confidence now, her red briefcase replaced by a worn backpack covered in small keychains she collected, though she still kept the briefcase safely tucked under her bed. Some habits, she said, were important to remember. She laughed more easily, spoke without rehearsing every word, and no longer flinched at the sound of elevators or alarms. The fear had not vanished completely, but it no longer ruled her. Maria changed too. The constant exhaustion that had once defined her softened as stability took its place. She no longer apologized for existing in rooms meant for others. She spoke up when something felt wrong. When Ethan noticed the shift, he realized how deeply silence had shaped not just Emily's childhood, but Maria's entire adult life. One afternoon, they stood together in the lobby of the rebuilt tower. It looked different now, warmer somehow, with natural light and open sightlines. Emily walked slowly, her hand brushing the wall as she approached the elevator bank. She stopped where it had all begun and looked up at Ethan. "They listen now," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Because you taught them how." She pressed the button herself this time, watching the doors open without fear. When they closed and the elevator rose smoothly, she smiled, small but genuine, and leaned back against the wall. Ethan watched her reflection in the mirrored panel and felt a quiet sense of peace settle in his chest. That evening, as they sat together at home, Emily pulled out her blue notebook for the last time. The pages were filled now, not with warnings or diagrams, but with stories. Ordinary ones. School days. Conversations. Moments she didn't want to disappear. "I think I don't need this anymore," she said, closing it gently. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I know people will listen now. And if they don't, I know how to make them." He smiled, feeling the truth of that settle deeply. Later, after Emily had gone to bed, Ethan stood alone by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought about the man he had been before the elevator, the man who measured success in deals and deadlines, who believed danger could be managed as long as it was documented. That man had survived. But the man standing there now had been changed. Not by fear, but by a child who refused to stay silent. In the end, it wasn't the broken elevator that mattered most. It was the moment a small voice spoke up in a world that had trained itself not to hear. And this time, the world had listened.